Well, today is the Sunday during the church year when MCCLV typically observes Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. As King and the Civil Rights Movement focused on justice, we also focus on justice today. Acts of justice are equally important as acts of charity. So first off, some examples of charity and justice are going to be offered, and then we're going to look at what the Bible says about both charity and justice, and we'll end with some ways in which MCCLV may be called to act justly in the world. Now, acts of charity and acts of justice are both vitally important. Charity tends to provide a direct service, such as clothing, food, shelter, while justice is more aimed at transforming institutions. Charity is directed at the symptoms of injustice, while justice is directed at the root causes of injustice. Charity tends to offer short-term relief, while justice is about long-term solutions. Okay, so I'm going to share a few examples to flesh out these ideas. Charity tends to be easier to participate in for people in general and church folks in particular. For instance, studies have shown that banking fees at the bank are an issue for those who have lower incomes. So people making under $30,000 a year in income, on average, pay $31 a month in bank fees. Everyone else pays on an average of $9 a month. Now, a charitable response to this injustice would be to start a program to help pay the bank fees for low-income people. A justice-oriented response would be to work to change the banking system so that low-income people are treated with more equity. Now, charity is a quicker fix, right? It's a quicker fix in this instance. It would immediately give financial relief, while justice work is long-term. It would involve many meetings, phone calls, community organizing, and holding the banking system accountable for its fee application. It's amazing how often corporations steal from the poor. ProPublica investigated the car insurance market in Chicago, for instance. And they found that people in poor neighborhoods were paying more for insurance compared to wealthier neighborhoods where car owners had more expensive cars. The poor are often accused of being immoral, but poverty, remember, is an economic condition. It's not a moral condition. And I think we need to take a closer look at corporate ethics. But back to charity. MCCLV has held a number of drives over the past year, right? Gloves for low-income elderly people, coats for kids, school supplies for students, toiletries for LGBT homeless youth, supplies for hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico. These types of drives are charitable acts. Praise be to God. And they are essential for any church. If there is a justice issue that is paired with each act of charity, right? With the glove drive, for instance. The Justice Act is about creating a society where every elderly person can afford gloves. With the coat drive, it's creating a society where every kid's family can afford a warm winter coat and can afford school supplies. With the toiletries for LGBT youth, it's about creating a society where all youth are valued. And with the Puerto Rico drive, it's about creating a world where disaster relief is equitably administered. In another act of charity, in December, MCCLV raised over $2,000 for grocery store gift cards for families in need at Buchanan Elementary School. Praise be to God. Yes, praise be to God. 8 families will be receiving gift cards. And 2 of these families, the principal shared with me, 2 of these families are teetering on the edge of homelessness. The other families are struggling with meeting bills. Now, the cards are going to be delivered to the families this coming Thursday afternoon. If anyone here would like to help deliver these food cards, you can see me after service today. So the justice-related act, that's the act of charity, right? The grocery store gift cards. The justice-related act is to work for a society where no family has trouble putting food on the table. Another example of charity is when MCCLV feeds homeless people. And the related act of justice is to end homelessness in the world. Now we could laugh and say, that's too big of a problem, but thankfully there are some people who have bold goals There's a group of advocates in the state of Utah who made a bold goal over a decade ago to end chronic homelessness in the state of Utah. And the state of Utah was able to reduce chronic homelessness by 91%. Now, chronic homelessness involves the toughest cases. People who are not only homeless, but are also dealing with an addiction, or they're in and out of prison, or they have mental health issues. So in 2005, Utah had 2,000 chronically homeless people, and now there are less than 200. Less than 200 people who are chronically homeless. Again, these were the toughest homeless cases. And the advocates in Utah developed a program called Housing First, and this is a model where housing is provided first before any other sort of service. Now, charity is often fun, and it may involve giving something and getting something back, right? We get a tote bag from the Sierra Club, right? Or we get a basket from the Tricky Tray, or we get a car wash from the American Heart Association, or one of my favorites, we get a box of Thin Mints from the Girl Scouts. Yes. There's nothing bad or wrong about these charitable efforts. What we're establishing is that charity is different than justice. Now, the numbers are in from 2016, and charitable donations in the United States totaled $390 billion. That is a lot of charity, and thankfully, research found that despite declining religious attendance, charitable contributions to religious organizations actually increased by 3% in 2016. Yes, praise be to God. Now, sometimes celebrity charity can get a little dicey. A while back, it was found that rock star Bono, his anti-poverty foundation, won. They channeled only 1.2% of the funds raised to people it was said to be assisting. In their provocatively titled book, Against Charity, authors Julie Wark and Daniel Raventos, they write that celebrities draw attention to social distress, but immediately cover it up by giving the impression that something is being done. And oftentimes, celebrity charity avoids any sort of socioeconomic context, and any awareness that is raised is often short-lived. Now, prior to giving to a charity, it's always best to do some research, and there are plenty of online tools that can help, such as Charity Navigator. Some people here might have used that. Charities are rated on the basis of things like their transparency and their accountability mechanisms. So we do need to be careful. We need to do our due diligence prior to making donations. Acts of charity can have a profound impact, and sometimes these acts of charity may actually morph into acts of justice. There's a story that Valerie Kuar, and she shares about her grandfather. Valerie Kuar is a Sikh activist. She's of the Sikh faith, and she's an interfaith leader. She founded the Revolutionary Love Project. She founded the Groundswell movement. And Valerie's grandfather was named Kihar Singh. And Kihar Singh was from India. He identified as a Sikh of the Sikh religion. And he arrived on the coast of California on September 23rd, 1913. And immigration officers took one look at the turban he wore as a part of his Sikh faith, and they threw him behind bars. It was a blatantly racist act, and Kihar Singh, he would have been deported, but a white lawyer filed a writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is a process that requires a person under arrest to be brought before a judge and released unless a cause for detention can be found. So Kihar Singh was released, and he eventually became a farmer in California's Central Valley. And during World War II, he saw his Japanese-American neighbors rounded up in detention camps. Now, Kihar Singh, he visited his neighbors in the camp when no one else would. He also looked after their farms so that they would have a home to return to after their detention. And their families still live on that land today. Now, Kihar Singh, he practiced what may seem like small acts of charity, right? Visiting neighbors in a detention camp, looking after their farms. But these acts had a large impact, and because of their long-term impact, they turned into acts of justice. He had been treated unjustly. His neighbors had been treated unjustly. And when we are treated unjustly, we often just want to return the behavior in kind. But when we practice charity in the face of injustice, we maintain that faith center. Now, in today's scripture passage from Acts, we hear about a disciple named Tabitha, who was devoted to good works and acts of charity. Tabitha is much beloved, and she's known especially for her support of widows. And we know that in reading the Bible that widows, orphans, and foreigners were in particular need of support in ancient times. Those three groups: widows, orphans, foreigners. Now, they were especially vulnerable. They often struggled with financial stability. And what Tabitha did is she made robes and other clothing for the widows in the community. And the scene we come upon today in the book of Acts is that the beloved disciple Tabitha has died. And some of her fellow disciples reach out for a miracle. They hear that Peter is nearby. They send for him, asking him to come immediately. And Peter kneels down in Tabitha's presence. He prays, and then he very boldly says, "Tabitha, get up." And Tabitha is healed. Hallelujah. Charity is powerful. And in this passage from Acts, charity is linked with other powerful things, like the power of community, the power of healing. Charity brings about wonders and miracles. Now, it's not that we do good works in order to earn God's healing, but when we are oriented to God, good works naturally flow from our lives. And when we have charitable hearts and charitable lives, we are open to healing. Now, theologian and philosopher Thomas Aquinas believed charity to be one of the greatest theological virtues. A theological virtue is not something we acquire through our own strength or power. Instead, it's poured out on us by the power of God. And for Thomas Aquinas, we are charitable through the power of the Holy Spirit, an infusion of the Holy Spirit. And the Latin word for charity is caritas. And Aquinas pointed out that charity is about humanity's friendship with God, and that charity unites us with God. Aquinas writes that even the charity by which we formally love our neighbor is a certain participation in divine charity. Love of neighbor, love of God. So those are some approaches on charity. Yet along with acts of charity, we are also to practice acts of justice. Says who? Well, says God. Especially through the prophets, and especially through a prophet named Amos. Now, prophets are unpopular at any time, but prophets are especially unpopular during good times. And Amos was prophesying during a particularly good time in the life of the northern kingdom of Israel. There was peace during this time period. The northern kingdom of Israel was at its largest in terms of its territory. It was at the peak of its national prosperity. If there was a stock market during this time, it would have been roaring. If there were corporations during this time, they would be delighted with, say, a massive corporate tax cut. And somehow these corporations would be able to convince many that the profits would trickle down to everyone. But again, back to Amos. During the time that the prophet Amos was active, there were deep economic inequalities, especially in terms of wealthy landowners amassing ever-increasing amounts of land at the expense of small farmers and smaller landholders. These large landholders found ways to manipulate debt and credit, and even a minuscule amount of debt could cause a farmer to lose their land. Now, Amos was fully aware of the manipulations of the elites, and Amos absolutely eviscerates them. He calls out their immorality, he calls out their lust for luxury, and their empty worship. What Amos is doing is he's providing a prophetic indictment of the elites, a prophetic indictment of the powers and principalities. God seems to be in a particularly bad mood today in this passage from Amos, right? After all, God is quoted as saying through Amos, I despise your festivals. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Take me away from the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But what? But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Through Amos, God is pointing out that worship without justice is just a bunch of people patting themselves on the back. When we gather together without care for the least of these, we're just a social group, not a spiritual gathering. Justice and its paired word righteousness are not something we create, But as scholar Jeremiah points out, that for Amos and all the prophets, the word pair, justice and righteousness, are not behavioral goals. Instead, justice and righteousness are rather primary gifts from God, which Israel can allow to flourish, can support, or Israel can obstruct and overthrow. The elites of the community of Israel are attempting to overthrow justice and righteousness. And in 2017, there are elites who are once again attempting to overthrow God's justice and righteousness. We always have to ask ourselves if power and wealth are being used to advance personal agendas, or if power and wealth are being used to advance the common good. Now, according to United Church of Christ scholar Walter Brueggemann, those who practice justice and righteousness are to be active advocates for the vulnerable and the marginal and the people without resources. And then that becomes a way to act out and exhibit one's love for God. So love of God gets translated into love of vulnerable neighbors. And the doing of justice is the prophetic invitation to do what needs to be done to enable the poor and the disadvantaged and the neglected to participate in the resources and the wealth of the community. And that's why we get much more nervous with justice compared to charity, right? Right?
Yeah.
Both charity and justice are about loving our neighbor, but with charity, we typically do not question economic systems and structures. With charity, there's a need, and we meet that need. With charity, we work, we help, we donate, but with justice work, we help and advocate. We speak truth to power, especially economic power. Like Amos, we tell people in power that they have trampled the head of the poor into the dust of the earth. And this is not going to make us particularly popular with powerful folks, or with folks who just do not want to make a fuss. But as openly gay civil rights legend Bayard Rustin once said, we need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Amen. Yes.
Our power, yes. Our power is in our ability to make things unworkable. The way to stop an unjust system is to make it unworkable. To make governmental systems, educational systems, healthcare systems, financial systems, telecommunication systems unworkable so that they become more equitable. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King led a civil rights movement for people, for justice and righteousness, for African Americans. Now, King did not start the civil rights movement. Activist Ella Baker said, the movement made Martin, not Martin the movement. But King was a key leader. King was a modern-day prophet whom God worked through to call people to equality. Because of King and the civil rights movement, greater equity has come to communities of color. Although there continues to be much justice work to do in order to be a country that truly values and treats equally all its people. It's not enough to just be charitable and throw money at communities of color, believing that will make things okay. Charity, again, is essential, but just as essential is justice. It's great to have more scholarships for students of color. It's great to invest in assisting minority-owned businesses. It's great to provide mentoring programs with communities of color. Yet, as the King quotation in the bulletin points out, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. And acts of justice include working towards effective law enforcement practices to protect the dignity of all citizens, transforming the way schools are funded so that all districts have access to the resources needed, and decreasing America's ridiculously high incarceration rates for communities of color. In the United States, African Americans are incarcerated 5 times more than whites. Latinos are incarcerated 1.4 more times compared to whites. Now we end today with, well, what in the world is a small church like MCCLV called to do in the face of such big problems? First off, let's remember this. The call to justice is from God. It's not something that we have to create. It's not something that's forced on us by people. And God does not call us to something and then not provide us with what we need to live out that calling. God has been training us and equipping us in different ways over the past years through things like the adult Christian education on Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. MCCLV certainly understands charity and has acted charitably. And MCCLV is growing in its understanding of justice and has had a justice orientation in its coordination of the Race and Education Forum, the Hoodie Rally, and other events and programs over the past year at the church. Now, the structure of Christian churches around the country provides one of the best places to develop a justice orientation, offering that combo platter of worship, education, fellowship, and service. Each one of these elements strengthens the other. We don't do justice work alone. We're not solo practitioners in justice work. And justice work cannot be separated from its biblical basis. Remember MCCLV's purpose statement: to worship and serve God through acts of justice and compassion. So both worship and serving is needed for any church. If the church is only about worship, then the church becomes a self-centered spiritual hangout that makes no impact on the wider community. And if the church is only about service, then the church becomes the Rotary Club with no connection to Christ. So the church needs both the worship and the serving. Acts of both justice and compassion, outreach and inreach, outer work and inner work. And with God as a guide, MCCLV is going to be gathering next Saturday for that strategic planning session to develop items out of its purpose statement, the concrete things that MCCLV will do to live out its purpose, to worship and serve God through acts of justice and compassion. Lunch will be provided. There is such a thing as a free lunch. Thank you. And let's pray now for God to bless that gathering next Saturday. And we also want to pray now for God to bless MCCLV's continuing call to offer both acts of charity and acts of justice in a world in such need. We thank you and praise you, God, for your provision. It's your provision of charity and justice. You call us to act justly. You call us to act with care. And we are ready to shine your light to a world in need. What an honor, O Lord, to be your light. Give us continued wisdom and direction as a congregation as we meet this coming Saturday to develop action items that are pleasing and acceptable to you. Most of all this day, O Lord, we ask that you put within us an openness to your justice, rolling down like waters in righteousness,